Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me get my first 1,000 subscribers. It's one click for you, but for me it's a huge encouragement and motivation. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's go. I had always thought of my life with Sarah as a safe haven. We've been together for 10 years. No kids, no frills, just two people going through life hand in hand. Sure, relationships can be complicated, but we got through it. That's what I thought. But at some point things changed. And it started with little things. One evening when I got home, Sarah was sitting on the couch, phone in hand and chuckling quietly. I asked her what had made her laugh so hard. She averted her gaze and replied something inaudible. Just a friend texted something funny. But that look stuck in my mind. It was as if a thin, almost imperceptible wall had come up between us. From that moment on, I began to notice small but alarming changes. Sarah used to always leave her phone on the table or in the kitchen. Now it became her constant companion, always in her hand or nearby. Occasionally she'd wander off to the other room to answer texts, though before she didn't care who heard her conversations. One night, when she decided to take the phone into the bedroom, I woke up to the vibration. Her fingers were sliding across the screen in the dark, and a faint smile played at the corners of her lips. For the morning, I pretended I hadn't noticed anything, but my heart started beating harder every time her phone made a notification sound. "Aren't you going to sleep?" I asked one day when Sarah was absent-mindedly texting someone late at night. She gave me an embarrassed look. "Sorry, work. I need to finish something." Work. It didn't fit in my head. She'd never been such a labor fanatic, and her work correspondence used to look very different. But I didn't argue, just nodded. It was better to observe in silence. Gradually her business trips began to appear more and more often. "Just for a couple days," she said each time. On weekends she wasn't home. And when I offered to go with her, she excused herself by saying that it was strictly a work trip and it wouldn't be interesting there. At some point, I realized I couldn't live in ignorance any longer. I didn't try to make a scene or directly confront her. No, I needed more evidence for that. And the more I thought about it, the stronger the desire to find out the truth became. If I start something now, I said to myself looking in the mirror, I need to be sure. I called an acquaintance who knew about installing video cameras. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. We sat in a small coffee shop and he quickly outlined the plan. Miniature cameras in the right places, discreet and undetectable. The video feed would be transmitted to your phone in real time, he explained. And even sound. You'll know everything. The next day, after Sarah left for work, I set up the installation. I placed the cameras so they wouldn't be conspicuous. In corners of rooms, among books on shelves, even in the bedroom where she wouldn't suspect anything. In the kitchen, I hid the camera between the cereal cans. I knew there would be no more room for secrets in this house. I double-checked every detail. Everything looked like nothing had changed. I held back the trembling in my hands as I set up the last microphone by the bed. It was necessary. Now all I had to do was wait. The first notification came the very next evening. Sarah was sitting in the kitchen with a glass of wine, her phone vibrating in her hand again. I watched it through the screen holding my phone in my hand. She checked the message and then replied with a smile before quickly leaving the room. I could hear her whispering in the hallway, but I couldn't make out the words. In the morning, I pretended to leave on a business trip, though I actually drove to the nearest parking lot and hooked up to the cameras. Sarah didn't know I could see everything. A new plot was unfolding in her life, and I intended to learn every detail of it. When I got home that night, she was surprisingly calm. A little too calm. There was a look of relief on her face. It was a sign something was beginning. The first notification came at night. Sarah was sitting next to me on the couch, staring at her phone, answering another text message. She thought I didn't notice anything. But I already knew what I had to do. As soon as she fell asleep, I quietly got out of bed, grabbed her phone, and headed to the study. My heart thumped deafeningly as I entered her password. It turned out to be all too predictable: our anniversary. The screen unlocked. I started searching. There was nothing suspicious in the messaging app at first glance. But then I found the archived chats. There he was, James. 3 o'clock in the morning. My fingers slid across the screen and my thoughts made it hard to focus. The correspondence started out as a meaningless flirtation, but it soon turned into something more. Sarah wrote about him the way she had once written about me, how he made her laugh, how she waited impatiently for his messages. The further I read, the more I wanted to hurl my phone at the wall. Instead, I hacked into her email. In the mail I found a correspondence where they were discussing the details of their upcoming meeting. A romantic dinner, candles, and a hotel on the outskirts of town. A classic but cheesy scenario. Part of the correspondence was particularly painful, with Sarah telling James how tired she was of our boring lives and how she finally felt alive. I sat in the dark, feeling a cold anger rising inside me. This wasn't just cheating anymore. This was a betrayal of everything we'd built together. But making a scandal right now would be too easy. I wanted more than that. I wanted her to feel the pain I was going through. Waiting until their upcoming meeting at the hotel seemed too long to me. I told her I had to go away on a business trip for a couple days, and of course she believed me. The next day, while Sarah was at work, I set about getting ready. In her dresser I found the lacy lingerie she was going to wear to the meeting. I carefully treated it with a solution containing capsaicin, a hot pepper extract. Discreet but effective. Once the fabric came in contact with her skin and began to warm, the burning sensation would be unbearable. Nice gift, I thought as I folded the underwear back up. A little pain in response to her lie. The day of the meeting came. In the morning, I defiantly packed my things, kissed her on the cheek, and wished her good luck on her work night. She, of course, smiled and assured me she would miss me. At this point I almost snapped but held back. I drove to a nearby neighborhood, parked in an empty parking lot and hooked up to the cameras. Sarah came home an hour later. I watched her fidgeting, getting ready for the meeting. Wine glasses, candles, a new tablecloth flashed in the frame. Everything had to look perfect. And there he was. Tall, with a short dark haircut, polite and confident. James. Sarah met him at the door with a hug as if she'd been waiting her whole life. I watched as he turned her around and embraced her, in the very spot where I used to stand. They drank wine and laughed like it was their first night together, without any embarrassment. I could feel the rage building inside, but I knew the best moment was yet to come. Everything was going according to plan. After dinner they moved into the bedroom. Sarah threw some lacy lingerie on the bed and with a smile began to put it on. I stuck to the screen like a hunter watching his prey. After a few seconds her face contorted. She tried to pretend everything was okay, but the expression of confusion was quickly replaced by alarm. Sarah frantically yanked the strap, then again. The first slight burning sensation turned to excruciating pain, and her face twisted in surprise. "What the hell?" she whispered, jumping up from the bed and scratching desperately. James stared confused, not realizing what was going on. Sarah tried to remain proud and collected, but her skin was burning with fire. She tore off her underwear and ran to the bathroom, cursing loudly. From the bedroom came the sounds of water and panicked screams. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, feeling myself finally smiling. When Sarah returned, her face was covered in red blotches and her eyes full of rage. She flashed a glare at James and blurted out, "You're the one who did something. How could you ruin everything?" James backed away, spreading his hands in confusion. He tried to justify himself, but Sarah wouldn't listen. A crack appeared in their relationship as quickly as the passion. They began to argue, throwing accusations around. I watched this like a spectator at a performance and felt a strange satisfaction. Sarah was getting more and more irritated by the minute. She was thrashing around the room, clutching her face and shoulders, trying to numb the searing pain that was only getting worse. James stood back, unsure of what to do and slowly beginning to lose patience. "Should we call a doctor?" he suggested, moving clumsily closer. "A doctor?" Sarah turned to him with fury in her eyes. "You don't understand. You've ruined everything." She yanked a towel off the bed, wrapped it around herself and rushed back into the bathroom, leaving James at a loss. I watched this through the camera, feeling a sense of satisfaction. At that moment I realized that just a little more and their little fairy tale would fall apart completely. Sarah returned a few minutes later, her face twisted with anger. James tried to calm her down, but it was as if she'd lost control. "I can't take this. You're a disaster. Why did you even come here?" she shouted, and James flinched as if slapped. "Look," he started, raising his hands as if in surrender, "I thought we were going to have a good time. You're the one who called me." Sarah snorted, averting her gaze. There was desperation in her eyes, the same desperation I was so eager to see. Everything she'd so carefully planned was crumbling before my eyes. "Maybe it was a mistake," James added quietly, taking a step back. This was the last straw. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She started yelling at him, accusing him of everything she could think of. James tried to object, but her rage knew no bounds. "Did you think this was romantic?" she shouted. "You don't even realize how complicated it is." I watched this scene with satisfaction, like a director whose play was perfectly executed. But what happened next was better. Sarah's phone suddenly rang and she rushed to it, as if hoping it would somehow save the situation. A name popped up on the screen. Jenny. It was James's wife. Oh, so that's how it's going to be, I grinned, figuring out exactly how Jenny's drama was unfolding right now. I'd contacted her beforehand and showed her all the evidence of their cheating photos, correspondence, camera footage. We agreed that she would call James at the most opportune moment. That's my wife, James mumbled, turning pale before his eyes. Sarah stared at him, and then, as if the horror of the situation had gotten to her, her face paled. She realized they had no way out now. Their little romance was doomed. You told her? Sarah lunged at him, grabbing his shirt. You idiot. You ruined everything. James broke free of her grip and hurried to the door. Sorry, I have to go, he said abruptly and walked out without looking back, leaving Sarah all alone. Sarah was left standing alone in the bedroom, breathing heavily as if the air around her was squeezing her. I watched this from the screen of my phone, feeling a cold, yet so welcome joy spreading inside me. I had seen it all. And it was only the beginning. Sarah stood motionless as if she couldn't believe things had gone so horribly wrong. Her fingers trembled as she tried to dial James' number again, but he didn't answer. His wife's cell phone, his personal hell, must have opened the doors by now. How could things have turned out like this? She whispered to herself, running her hands through her hair, leaving it disheveled. I watched it in real time and felt a sense of satisfaction. But the play isn't over yet. I decide to deliver the final blow. Plugging in the bedroom microphone on my phone, I turned on the sound and dialed Sarah's number. Her face reflected surprise and confusion when she saw my name on the screen. She hesitated for a couple seconds but accepted the call. Hello, love, I said in a cold, even voice. She sat up abruptly on the bed, frantically gripping the phone. Are you? Where are you? She asked nervously, trying to hide the panic in her voice. It doesn't matter where I am anymore. But you know what? I saw everything, Sarah. Everything. My speech was calm, but there was an icy tinge of gloating in it. She froze, the phone trembling in her hands. What did you see? She whispered, her voice trembling. I grinned. James isn't your secret prince anymore. I talked to his wife. She already knows. And yes, I'm preparing divorce papers. There was a long, agonizing pause. Time seemed to stand still. Sarah gulped convulsively for air, as if trying to find something to say in her defense. But there were no words. It's just a mistake, please, can we talk? She shouted, no longer trying to hide her panic. I just grinned. A mistake? Is that what you call the 10 years you buried for one night? We'll talk in court, Sarah. Her face went pale. I could see her frantically searching around for something, as if trying to clutch at the last straw. Tears glistened in her eyes for the first time in a long time. I disconnected the call, not giving her another chance. The beeping sound on the other end of the line was sweet. I felt like a victor, finally out of a long war. On the camera screen, Sarah slowly sat down on the bed and broke into sobs. Her world crumbled right before my eyes and I sat in my car watching. Everything I had once felt for this woman was gone, turning into a cold void. The phone in her hand fell out on the bed, but it didn't ring anymore. She knew the game was over. James was gone, I was gone, and her world was falling apart. But I wasn't going to stop. The ending was going to be even more devastating. It was starting to get dark outside. I dialed the number of the courier I'd instructed to deliver the envelope with the divorce papers directly to Sarah's office. Everything had to be perfect. No private conversation at home, just public humiliation in front of her coworkers. Time to send the last move and close this chapter for good. As soon as I pressed the call button, my phone vibrated. The courier confirmed that the delivery would be made tomorrow at the appointed hour. I exhaled, looking at the flickering screen of my phone. Things were just getting started. I woke up early the next day feeling oddly calm, like the day before a storm. The envelope with the divorce papers was on its way. It was going to happen in Sarah's office, in front of her coworkers, in a way that would be etched in her memory forever. In the morning, I tapped into the cameras to make sure everything was going according to plan. Sarah left the house a little later than usual, her face was tired and her gaze absent. It had clearly been a rough night. She arrived at the office around 9 in the morning. I saw her nervously fixing her hair, hoping to hide her despair. But that was just the beginning. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat back in the car, preparing to watch this play unfold. About half an hour later, I got a notice from the courier. He was already there. I could even see him through the building's camera, a regular guy in a delivery service uniform, holding a white envelope. He headed to the front desk and handed the paperwork to the clerk. For Sarah. Urgent delivery, he said nonchalantly and turned around, walking away as calmly as he'd come. I clutched the phone in my hand, feeling the anticipation building inside me. A few minutes later, the secretary entered Sarah's office and handed her an envelope. I tapped into the microphone hidden in her bag to hear every word. "What's this?" Sarah frowned, looking at the secretary. "I don't know," she replied, shrugging her shoulders. "The courier said it was for you." Sarah opened the envelope slowly, her fingers trembling and her breathing becoming ragged. A tense silence hung in the office. The rustle of the paper seemed deafening. Finally she pulled out the divorce papers. Her face reflected first bewilderment, then horror. I could imagine the memories of what had happened yesterday flashing before my eyes. James, the scandal, her breakdown. Now she held in her hands the undeniable proof that her life was falling apart before her eyes. "No, no," she whispered, dropping the papers on the table. She began to panic, as if trying to realize the magnitude of the disaster. At that moment, a colleague approached her desk, a tall blonde who always looked down on Sarah. "What's wrong, Sarah?" she asked with a slight sneer in her voice. Sarah frantically tried to hide the papers, but the woman had already noticed the headline, "Divorce Papers." The blonde squinted her eyes and let out a short laugh. "Well, looks like someone's in serious trouble," she said loud enough for everyone around her to hear. The whispers instantly spread around the office. Colleagues cast curious glances, some glanced over, others hid smiles behind cups of coffee. Sarah, realizing she was the object of attention, looked around nervously. It's not what you think," she squeezed out, but her voice trembled traitorously. "Of course it is," the blonde grinned, nodding theatrically. "Life is so unpredictable, isn't it?" Sarah felt the ground slipping from under her feet. She tried to gather her papers, but her fingers shook so badly that she dropped a few sheets on the floor. The people around her started laughing. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the total collapse of her self-confidence. And then the climax. The door to the office suddenly opened and James walked in. His face was pale and confusion was evident. He obviously hadn't expected to see Sarah in such a state and froze in place, as if he didn't know what to do. "You?" Sarah shouted when she saw him. She sounded desperate and furious. "I had to pick something up," James mumbled, trying to justify himself, but it only added fuel to the fire. "Pick it up?" Sarah boiled up. "You ruined my life and now you just want to take something away." They started arguing right in front of everyone. The people around them stopped hiding their smirks and whispered comments. It was a total public embarrassment. With every word, with every shout, Sarah was sinking lower and lower, losing control of the situation. I sat in my car and watched the show, feeling cold satisfaction. It was exactly as I had planned. I had put her through the humiliation she deserved. And that was only the beginning of her downfall. As their argument reached its peak, Sarah, realizing that every word, every accusation was like a knife to her reputation, suddenly fell silent. James, realizing that nothing more could be done, walked out of the office with his head down, leaving her standing alone amidst the gloating stares and whispers of his colleagues. Sarah rushed to gather up the scattered papers, but everything was happening too fast. All her attempts to regain a modicum of control looked pathetic. No one offered her any help. The blonde leaned over her and whispered mockingly, "Looks like the fairy tale is over, doesn't it?" Sarah jumped up abruptly and ran out of the office, leaving the papers lying on the floor. She didn't know where to run, what to do. Panic was tearing her up inside and tears were covering her eyes. The moment she ran outside and opened her car door, I was already sitting in the cafe across the street, watching the denouement. Sarah was sobbing, choking on her emotions. Her perfect world had shattered utterly and irrevocably. I saw her reach for her phone, but all attempts to reach me were futile. I wasn't going to talk to her anymore. Our conversations ended for good. A week later, our divorce was made official. The papers were signed and I was left with the house, the car, and almost all of our assets. All Sarah got was an empty apartment and a shattered pride. James wasn't going to support her either. Their relationship ended as quickly as it had begun. After Jenny prepared her divorce papers, he was left without a family and penniless. The last time I saw Sarah was when I dropped off her things at her rental apartment. She met me with a desperate look, trying to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. Without a word, I left the boxes by the door and walked away. Her pathetic attempts to fix anything didn't matter anymore. Time passed and my life slowly returned to normal. Jenny and I continued to keep in contact. Our conversations would drag on for hours, and over time an unexpected bond developed between us. We shared our pain, our fears, but also our hope for the future. Something was beginning to blossom between us, but I wasn't in a hurry to define it. The only thing that mattered was that I felt like I was finally moving forward. And that concludes our story today. Thank you for watching to the end. If you liked it, please give it a like and leave a comment. Also, we are always happy to discuss any comments you may have. See you in the next video.